Some places hold secrets. They absorb the energy of events, both good and bad. When Jack and Janet Smurl bought their duplex on Chase Street in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, they thought they had found the perfect home. It was 1974. They were a young, happy family, looking to build a future. The house was old, sure, but it had character. It was a place where their 4 daughters could grow up, a place to make memories. They never could have imagined the kind of memories this house had in store for them. It was a classic American dream, a fresh start. But sometimes a fresh start means walking into someone else's unfinished nightmare. We've seen it time and time again in our investigations. The house itself seemed innocent enough. It was a simple 2-story building, split down the middle. Jack's parents, John and Mary, lived on one side, while Jack, Janet, and their kids took the other. It was a close-knit family arrangement meant to offer support and security. The walls were thin, and life was shared between the 2 households. But this closeness would soon mean that the terror wasn't isolated. It would spread, infecting everyone under that single roof. The initial feelings of hope and excitement slowly began to curdle, replaced by a sense of unease they couldn't quite explain. A feeling that they were not alone. This is how it always begins. A subtle shift in the atmosphere, a cold spot in a warm room. Think about it, you move into a new place. You unpack your boxes, you hang your pictures, you make it your own. The Smurls did all of that. They painted walls, arranged furniture, and filled the rooms with laughter. But there was something else already there, a silent occupant that had been waiting. This entity, this dark energy, didn't care about their hopes or their dreams. It saw them as intruders. It saw them as something to play with, something to torment. The house on Chase Street wasn't just wood and nails, it was a vessel. And something ancient and malevolent was about to wake up. For the first year or so, things were quiet, life was normal. The kids played in the yard, the family had dinners together. They settled into the rhythm of their new life, the strange feelings fading into the background of daily routine. But the entity was patient. It was watching, waiting. It was learning their fears, their weaknesses. The tranquility was just the calm before the storm, a storm that would rage for over a decade, pushing a family to the absolute brink of their sanity and faith. This wasn't just a ghost story, this was a documented case of a family under siege by a powerful, intelligent, and demonic force. We have to ask ourselves, what was it that drew such darkness to this specific location? The first signs were small, easy to dismiss. You know how it is. An old house makes noises. Pipes rattle, floorboards creak. The Smurls tried to rationalize what they were experiencing. A strange stain would appear on a new carpet, only to vanish days later. Tools would go missing from Jack's workbench, then reappear in a completely different spot. At first, they blamed each other, thinking it was just forgetfulness or a prank. But the incidents became more frequent, more specific. They started hearing faint whispers when no one was talking. The sounds were muffled like a radio playing in another room, but there was no radio on. It was just a whisper on the edge of hearing, a voice with no source. The smells were another thing. They would come and go without any explanation. Sometimes it was the sweet, cloying scent of perfume. Other times it was a foul, sulfurous odor, like rotten eggs. The smells would fill a room, thick and overwhelming, and then disappear in an instant. Janet would be cooking in the kitchen, and suddenly the smell of decay would be so strong she'd feel sick. She'd search for the source, the trash, the sink, but find nothing. It was a direct assault on the senses, a way for the entity to announce its presence without showing itself. It was a classic sign of a negative presence, a calling card of something inhuman trying to cross over into our world. Then came the cold spots. These weren't just drafts from a window, these were pockets of intense, bone-chilling cold that would materialize in the middle of a warm room. One of their daughters would be playing on the floor and suddenly start shivering, complaining about being freezing cold, even though the thermostat was set to 70 degrees. Jack would walk through the hallway and pass through a zone of icy air that would raise the hairs on his arms. These were measurable physical changes in the environment. We've captured this on our thermal imaging cameras countless times. It's the energy signature of a spirit drawing heat from its surroundings to manifest. The family tried to ignore it. They wanted a normal life. They didn't want to believe their dream home was turning against them. They would explain it away as a faulty furnace or drafts in an old house. But deep down, a seed of fear was planted. They were living on edge, always waiting for the next strange occurrence. The whispers became a little louder, the cold spots a little colder. The entity was testing them, pushing the boundaries to see how much they could take. This initial phase is crucial in any haunting. It's the period of psychological warfare, where the spirit tries to break you down mentally before it escalates to physical attacks. The Smurls were just at the beginning of their long, dark journey. As the months bled into years, the subtle activity began to give way to more terrifying visual phenomena. The family started seeing things. It began with fleeting movements in the corner of their eyes, a flicker of motion, a dark shape darting past a doorway. But soon, these glimpses became more defined. Janet reported seeing a dark human-shaped mass, a shadow figure standing in the corner of her bedroom. It had no features, no details, just a void of pure blackness that seemed to absorb the light around it. When she would turn on the lamp, it would simply vanish, leaving behind only the lingering cold and the metallic taste of fear in her mouth. This shadow person wasn't just a passive observer. Its presence was menacing. It seemed to radiate a feeling of pure hatred. The Smurl's eldest daughter saw it too, a tall, dark figure standing at the end of her bed, watching her sleep. She would wake up paralyzed with fear, unable to scream, feeling its oppressive energy weighing down on her. We call these shadow people. Are they spirits of the dead? Are they interdimensional beings? Or are they something else entirely, demonic entities cloaked in darkness? Whatever they are, their appearance almost always signals a significant escalation in paranormal activity. They are a warning sign that the haunting is becoming more dangerous. The auditory phenomena also grew more intense. The faint whispers turned into clear, disembodied voices. They would hear their names being called from empty rooms. Sometimes they would hear loud, angry arguments coming from the vacant side of the duplex. Jack and his father would rush over thinking someone had broken in, only to find the doors locked and the rooms completely empty. The sounds of heavy footsteps would stomp up and down the stairs at night. But a check would reveal nothing. The entity was no longer hiding. It was making its presence known, taunting them, letting them know they were living in its space, not their own. The psychological toll was immense. How do you sleep when you know a shadow figure might be standing over your bed? How do you relax when disembodied voices are calling your name? The Smurls were living in a constant state of high alert. The fear was a poison, seeping into every aspect of their lives. They became irritable, sleep-deprived, and suspicious of every creak and groan the old house made. This is the goal of a negative entity, to create an environment of fear, because fear is a source of energy. The more scared the Smurls became, the stronger the entity grew. It was feeding on their terror, preparing for its next, more violent phase. The strange occurrences were no longer just sounds and shadows. The entity was now powerful enough to physically interact with the world. It started with appliances turning on and off by themselves. The television would blare to life in the middle of the night, startling the entire family awake. The radio would switch stations on its own, often landing on static or eerie, old-fashioned music. Faucets would turn on full blast, flooding sinks and floors. These were not electrical glitches. These were deliberate acts, calculated to intimidate and unnerve. The house was no longer a safe haven. It had become an unpredictable, hostile environment, a place where the laws of physics no longer seemed to apply. Objects began to move with terrifying purpose. A fan that was securely fastened to the ceiling fell, nearly hitting one of the daughters. Drawers would fly open, their contents spilling onto the floor. Pictures would be violently thrown from the walls. Janet was in the kitchen one day when she saw a butcher knife levitate from its block and hover in the air for a moment before clattering to the floor. This was no longer just a ghost. This was a poltergeist, a noisy, violent spirit. But the intelligence behind the act suggested something far more sinister. This wasn't random chaos, it was a targeted campaign of terror designed to escalate their fear to a breaking point. The entity's power continued to grow, fueled by the family's escalating fear. The activity became more personal, more direct. One evening, the family heard a tremendous crashing sound from upstairs. They ran up to find a large chandelier which had been in the house for decades had been ripped from the ceiling and smashed to pieces on the floor below. No one was upstairs at the time. The wiring was intact. The bolts had been sheared off as if by a massive, unseen force. It was a clear demonstration of power, a message that nowhere in the house was safe, and that the entity could cause serious physical harm if it wanted to. The family was trapped. Who do you call when your house is trying to kill you? The police? An electrician? They were living a nightmare that no one else could see or understand. They felt isolated, helpless. The constant stress was tearing them apart. Jack became withdrawn. Janet was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and the children were terrified. The American dream they had sought on Chase Street had twisted into a waking hell. The entity had successfully isolated them and broken them down psychologically. Now, it was ready to move on to the next most horrific stage of its assault: direct physical attacks on the family themselves. The invisible barrier between the family and the entity was finally broken. The haunting crossed a terrifying line from psychological torment to direct physical assault. Janet was the first to be targeted. One day, while standing in the kitchen, she was violently shoved by an unseen force, sending her flying across the room. There was no one there. Later, she felt icy hands grip her, leaving her shaken and terrified. But the attacks grew more sinister. She reported being levitated from her bed and thrown against the wall. The entity was no longer content with just scaring her. It was now inflicting pain, demonstrating its physical dominance over the living. Jack also became a target of these violent, invisible assaults. But the attacks on him were often more intimate and disturbing. He and Janet both reported that a succubus, a demonic entity that preys on humans sexually, was active in the home. They described horrific encounters in their bedroom, assaults that left them not only physically violated but also spiritually and emotionally shattered. This is a rare and extreme form of paranormal attack, often associated with powerful non-human entities. It's a level of violation that goes beyond fear, aiming to defile and demoralize its victims completely. This was no ghost, this was a demon. The children were not spared from the physical torment. The daughters reported being shaken in their beds, pulled by their hair, and scratched by an unseen presence. One of the most chilling pieces of evidence the family had were the long red scratch marks that would appear on their skin out of nowhere. These weren't accidental scrapes. They often appeared in sets of 3, a mockery of the Holy Trinity, a classic sign of demonic activity we look for in our own investigations. Imagine the horror of seeing these wounds appear on your child's skin, knowing you are powerless to stop the invisible attacker who inflicted them. The house on Chase Street had become a war zone. The Smurl family was under constant siege from a force they could not see, fight, or understand. Their lives were a relentless cycle of fear, violence, and violation. They were physically and emotionally exhausted, pushed to the absolute edge. They knew they couldn't survive this on their own. They had tried praying, they had tried blessing the house with holy water, but the attacks only grew worse, as if mocking their attempts to fight back. They needed help from someone who understood the darkness they were facing. They needed experts in the field of paranormal warfare. Their desperation finally led them to make a phone call to a couple in Connecticut, Ed and Lorraine Warren. In 1986, after more than a decade of escalating terror, the Smurls were at their breaking point. They reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren, the most famous paranormal investigators in the world. Ed was a self-taught demonologist, the only one recognized by the Vatican, and Lorraine was a gifted clairvoyant, able to see and sense the spirits that haunted a location. When the Warrens received the call, they recognized the severity of the case immediately. They had seen this pattern before, a slow escalation from minor disturbances to violent demonic oppression. They agreed to travel to West Pittston to investigate the claims and confront the darkness that had taken root in the Smurl home. Upon their arrival, the Warrens began their standard investigation protocol. Ed, the demonologist, interviewed every member of the family separately, meticulously documenting their experiences. He looked for corroboration, for patterns, for the specific details that would help him identify the nature of the entity. Lorraine, the clairvoyant, walked through the house, opening herself up to the spiritual energy within. She immediately sensed not 1 but 4 powerful entities. She described 3 as minor spirits, but the 4th was a powerful, ancient, and profoundly evil demon. It was this demon, she explained, that was manipulating the other spirits and orchestrating the violent attacks on the family. The Warrens brought their equipment and their experience, but they also brought a sense of validation for the Smurls. For years, the family had suffered in silence, fearing ridicule and disbelief. The Warrens listened, and they believed them. They confirmed that the family was not crazy. They were victims of a genuine demonic infestation. During their investigation, the Warrens themselves witnessed paranormal activity. They recorded disembodied voices on their audio equipment, witnessed objects moving on their own, and felt the oppressive negative energy that saturated the house. Ed noted a black mass in the home, corroborating what Janet had seen. Ed Warren concluded that the house was infested with a powerful demon that was feeding on the family's fear. He explained that this entity was cunning and intelligent. It had been there long before the Smurls moved in and had been lying dormant. For some unknown reason, it had chosen to manifest and attach itself to them. The Warrens' diagnosis was terrifying, but it also offered a glimmer of hope. By identifying the enemy, they could now formulate a plan to fight back. The first step, they advised, was to bring in the authority of the church. The Smurls needed more than investigators. They needed an exorcist. With the Warrens' involvement, the Smurl haunting exploded from a private nightmare into a national news story. The media descended on the small town of West Pittston, turning Chase Street into a circus. News vans lined the block, reporters camped out on the lawn, and cameras were pointed at the house day and night. The Smurls, who had once suffered in silence, were now thrust into the harsh glare of the public spotlight. Their story was featured in newspapers, on television news programs, and became a topic of debate on talk shows across the country. The house on Chase Street was suddenly one of the most famous haunted houses in America. The public reaction was deeply divided. Many people were sympathetic and horrified by the family's ordeal. They sent letters of support, offered prayers, and followed the case with rapt attention. Believers in the paranormal saw the Smurl case as undeniable proof of the supernatural world, especially with the credibility of the Warrens attached. However, there was also a huge wave of skepticism and ridicule. Critics accused the Smurls of fabricating the entire story for fame and fortune. They were called liars, hoaxers, and mentally unstable. Neighbors became hostile, tired of the media circus that had disrupted their quiet community. The family was attacked from two fronts, by the entity inside their home and by the disbelief and scorn of the world outside. The pressure was immense. Every detail of their private terror was now public knowledge, picked apart and analyzed by strangers. Jack lost his job due to the stress and the constant media attention. The family's credibility was constantly questioned. Skeptics offered rational explanations for everything. The noises were faulty plumbing, the smells were from a nearby sewer line, the attacks were hallucinations brought on by mass hysteria. But these explanations couldn't account for the physical evidence, the scratch marks, the moving objects witnessed by multiple people, including the Warrens and a local reporter who was present when a mirror flew off the wall. Despite the scrutiny, the Smurls stood by their story. They insisted they just wanted the haunting to stop so they could have a normal life again. The media attention was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it brought their plight to the attention of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Scranton, pressuring them to act. On the other hand, it added an incredible layer of stress to an already unbearable situation. The demon in the house seemed to revel in the chaos, with paranormal activity reportedly increasing during the height of the media frenzy. It was as if the entity was enjoying the show, feeding off the negative energy of the controversy it had created. Faced with the evidence gathered by the Warrens and mounting public pressure, the Diocese of Scranton finally agreed to intervene. Although they were reluctant to authorize a full, formal rite of exorcism, they sanctioned several masses to be held inside the home. Priests came to the house and blessed it with holy water, reciting prayers in an attempt to drive the evil presence out. The family prayed with them, clinging to their faith as their last line of defense. However, these initial blessings seemed to have the opposite effect. The demon reacted with fury. The activity in the house escalated dramatically, becoming more violent and blasphemous than ever before. The Warrens had warned that this might happen. Challenging a powerful demonic entity often provokes it. After the blessings, the family reported being tormented by loud banging noises, pig-like sounds, and horrific smells. The demon was showing its contempt for the attempts to expel it. It was a spiritual battle and the entity was fighting back hard. Seeing that simple blessings were not enough, the Warrens brought in Father Robert McKenna, a traditionalist priest who was experienced in performing the rite of exorcism. He agreed that the house and its inhabitants were in the grip of a demonic force and that a full exorcism was necessary. Father McKenna performed the ancient ritual 3 times at the Chase Street house. The rite is a powerful and dangerous ceremony, a direct confrontation with evil. It involves prayers, holy water, crucifixes, and commands made in the name of God for the demon to depart. During these exorcisms, the family and investigators present reported a tangible change in the atmosphere. The air would grow heavy and cold. They heard unearthly growling sounds and witnessed objects shaking violently. The demon resisted fiercely, but with each rite, its power seemed to diminish. The house felt lighter, the oppressive presence lessened, but the entity was not yet completely gone. The exorcisms provided temporary relief, but the demon was persistent. It would retreat for a while, only to return, though often with less intensity. The Warrens explained that sometimes a demon can form a strong attachment to a place or a person, making it incredibly difficult to expel completely. Although the most violent activity ceased after the third exorcism, the family still experienced residual phenomena. They knew the entity was still there, lurking in the shadows. The battle had been fought, but the war for their home and their peace of mind was not quite over. The family realized that they might never be truly free as long as they remained in that house. After the third exorcism, the most terrifying and violent aspects of the haunting subsided. The physical attacks stopped, and the house on Chase Street grew quieter, but it was not a peaceful quiet. It was an uneasy silence filled with the memory of what had happened there. The Smurl family continued to experience minor paranormal activity, strange noises, fleeting shadows, and that persistent feeling of being watched. The demon had been wounded, its power diminished by the rites, but a dark energy still lingered in the home. The family had won the battle, but the house itself felt permanently stained by the evil it had harbored. In 1988, exhausted and emotionally scarred, the Smurls made the difficult decision to leave. They could no longer live in a place that held so many traumatic memories. They moved away from West Pittston, hoping to leave the nightmare behind them and find peace elsewhere. After they moved, Jack Smurl claimed that the demon followed them to their new home for a short time, a final, desperate attempt to maintain its grip. However, its power was significantly weakened away from its source on Chase Street, and the activity eventually faded away completely. The family was finally free. The new tenants who moved into the duplex reported no unusual experiences. The Smurl haunting remains one of the most intense and well-documented cases of demonic infestation in American history. It was the subject of a book, The Haunted, and a television movie, cementing its place in paranormal lore. Skeptics continue to dismiss the case as a hoax, but the family, along with the Warrens and other witnesses, have always maintained that their terrifying ordeal was real. They never sought fame and, by all accounts, did not profit financially from their story. They were an ordinary family who found themselves in an extraordinary and horrifying situation, and their only goal was survival. What was the dark force that resided in the house on Chase Street? Was it the spirit of a long-dead resident, twisted into something malevolent over time? Or was it, as the Warrens believed, an ancient, non-human demonic entity that simply chose that location to exert its will on our world? These are the questions that linger. The house still stands today, a silent monument to the terror that a family endured within its walls. The story of the Smurl haunting serves as a chilling reminder that there are dark corners of our world that we do not understand. It proves that sometimes the monster under the bed is very, very real. We have to believe the victims.